Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Another Monday, another video. Today we're going to discuss the 5 dysfunctions of a team. I think most people have heard about this book. A lot of you have read this book. So let's jump right into it. Today we're going to discuss what exactly is that pyramid structure and what does it mean and how do we understand how to navigate that in our organization. And we're going to do that step by step. First of all, at the very bottom of this pyramid, we have absence of trust. Then we go to fear of conflict, followed by a lack of commitment, and then an avoidance of accountability, and then all of that ends with an inattention to results. And that is essentially the model for 5 dysfunctions of a team. The majority of this book is around what the author is calling the fable. And this is an interesting way to tell a story. It's not an old school business book where you read some principles and how to apply them mathematically. It's walking you through the emotional experience of somebody trying to repair a dysfunctional team. They're actually repairing a dysfunctional management team. And it's a really useful thing to read through. I won't cover it too much for you here because I actually think it's more valuable for you to read that because of the types of lessons inside of it are quite interesting. There's techniques in there around how to handle very challenging conversations and role modeling behavior. And I think to absorb that role modeling behavior, you should just read that part. But a lot of the, let's call it academic knowledge of how to handle these things is described very well in the model. And so the model provides you with everything you need to know to make sense of what you saw in the fable and structure that information and reapply it a little bit more clearly and identify, okay, I'm in this kind of challenge. I should focus my efforts this way and try maybe some of those tactics. And then using some of the things you saw in the fable, for instance, when the new CEO was directly, openly challenged by somebody in a very unproductive way, how do you respond to that in a way that's not destructive and not giving in and jeopardizing the mission? Really useful to do. Most of what we're going to discuss today is going to be talking about the model. So this is a really interesting book for you to read, and I think one of the most important books that you're going to read, especially when you start your leadership journey, even if you're already mature in your leadership journey and you're trying to figure out why are things not working and why can't I get everybody to pull in the same direction, and why does my whole company feel like some medieval fiefdom where everybody's trying to carve out a territory for themselves and we just can't seem to pull these two departments together. If you're running into those problems, you need to read the book and you need to follow the model to at least try to crack that. This book is really discussing dysfunctions in terms of teams, especially leadership level teams that are not cooperating across an organization to pull the company in one unified direction for the betterment of the whole organization. This is the thing that this book is after. This is why it's been such a popular book for many decades. And it's probably one of the reasons this book ends up being in the offices of most companies you're going to walk into. It's just that common of a problem, and the model works. Like, it really works, and it explains the hard work you have to do to get over those problems. So it's a step-by-step approach, but it does explain to you what to do and how to do it. So highly valuable book. I highly recommend it. If you don't have a copy yet, there's a link for it down in the description. You can check that out later. Again, I think it's worth it so you can watch step by step what role model behaviors a leader who has to drive these initiatives looks like in practice. And that's a lot of the value out of reading this book. The model itself is very valuable, but understanding what it really looks like in practice is one of the reasons the fable is such an effective method to help new leaders figure out what they should be doing in different situations as they make their teams function. Now, this model is really interesting to me. I think if you watch a lot of YouTube, eventually you'll find the conspiracy channels talking about who built the pyramids and was it UFOs and things like this. The model is actually quite reasonably built step by step. And what's really important, the author is telling us they are not isolated problems to solve one by one. It's actually a chain of dependencies on these problems. So you need to actually solve that ground layer first. And the author constructs for you the model this way, saying, first, we have to really solve the absence of trust. If we don't have trust, we can't move further. And the author actually really makes a point of explaining trust is not what sometimes is misunderstood for, which is I trust that I can predict your behavior because I've seen it enough. You know, a lot of people inside organizations say, I trust that this person will do a good job because they've seen them do a good job a few times. They can pattern match and predict. The author of Five Dysfunctions of a Team is actually saying it's about behaviors and attitudes, right? So I am confident that your intentions are good. This is the first level of trust that the author is really discussing, not discussing, I've been with somebody for a very long time. And I think you'll see a lot of executives fall into this trap, especially as they move from one company to another. It is very attractive to say, I'm going to bring my team from my old company with me because I trust them, I know them, I can predict what they're doing. But this is actually about being confident intentions are good, not being able to predict that somebody is doing the right thing. This is a different sort of trust. And I think it can be embarrassing to be a leader or the head of a leadership team, like the CEO or something like this, to be in such a leadership position and know your team is dysfunctional. But I think you'll identify it the second you see that people are behaving. And if you remember from some previous videos, we talked about Western culture, you're not seeing that generative behavior where people are reaching out to help each other accomplish a mutual goal. They're more about building high walls to protect their bureaucracy, or even worse, acting like a pathological organization and trying to engineer their own promotions or engineer their own departments to look better. And that can take many forms. But I think this is the fundamental thing, is people are either not working towards that larger goal, bad faith actors, and a lot of this stuff, unfortunately, can actually be hidden from you when you are at such a high level. You might not even be able to detect it so easily. So it's really important to keep your ear to the ground and look for patterns of generative behavior where people are cooperating. Make sure you actually have trust between people and they understand that the intentions of everyone around them is to do the right thing for one another. And this, by the way, can be a little bit challenging too, because, you don't always have good faith actors inside of an organization. Sometimes there really are actors in a company in leadership positions who just want to take care of themselves. And it just happens. It's one of the challenges with overcoming this is you need an environment where you can do that. And so one of the things the author's going to call out right away is not everybody will be part of becoming a functional team. If they are dedicated to certain behaviors or certain mindsets that don't work. It's just a reality of it, right? This is the way things need to work. One interesting thing the author does is not just identify this problem of an absence of trust, but concretely tell you what to do about it. And so the author outlines for us different activities we can do in our teams at different levels of investment and different levels of personal closeness. But they're really simple stuff ranging to more complicated stuff. So at the very top is this personal histories activity, and that's really just ask your peers on your team and get to know, what's your life story? How did you end up in this position? What brought you here? What motivated you to take this path through life? And just understand where everybody's coming from. You will be surprised how many times on leadership teams, they just don't have that level of familiarity with one another. And that meshes really well with a lot of other leadership concepts, especially like radical candor, where it says you should understand your peers on a personal level so you can build a rapport with them, work with them effectively. Right? So there's a lot of layover over there. A lot of smart people are saying the same thing. A lot of really smart people are saying the same fundamental, extremely low cost thing. You would be foolish not to implement this in your leadership team. If you're in a leadership team and you're not doing this at such a low price point, it's irresponsible. Another technique the author gifts us is appreciation interviews, finding out something that one of your peers did on that team, thanking them for it, which is a very specific way to say thank you. It's not that generic, oh yeah, thank you for that. It's really explaining why what they did was valuable, explaining their contributions, so the effort they put in and what the result was and why that was a good thing. Just taking a minute to do this helps build that level of trust. Now, there's one thing that the author does that I think is a little bit outdated and I think is the wrong thing, which is suggesting that people take the Myers-Briggs personality test. I think that's quite outdated. It's not only outdated, there's a lot of evidence out there saying it's not a good way to look at personality. Just if you follow up on the modern reading, you will discover this on your own. Don't take my word for it. Run it through your search engine. take a look. I think a more modern version of that would be something like the Big Five personality test, which seems to have a lot more support, but it's ultimately trying to use some sort of psychological profiling to understand what are the things that can build trust or deteriorate trust with my peers. Understanding everybody is unique. I guess it's a kind of looking for a shortcut to that. I do think it's a hazard to invent stuff here. Please don't invent your own psychology tests and profiling, and be very careful of what you do accept into your own practice, because there's a lot of room to make mistakes. I think it was one of the big Silicon Valley companies gave everybody a Star Trek system of you're a red player, a green player, a blue player, and red meant leadership, and somehow everybody wanted to be red. Be careful with this personality test stuff. That's all I want to say. Something else really important, and I think that, again, you heard that in my Radical Candor video, feedback is separated from compensation. Here it is again, right? Really smart people telling you don't do that single thing that destroys real feedback, right? Because the moment you do that, it becomes political. You have to be very careful to keep those things separated. And that is the thing that allows you to, we'll come to it soon, but give a healthy challenge to somebody else's. That healthy challenge is also not a punch to their income. And the author summarizes it really well for us in saying that the fear of being vulnerable prevents team members from building trust. And I think that makes a lot of sense, resonates really well with all the modern thought leaders that have success in building feedback cultures, trust cultures. This stuff is ground layer. If this doesn't exist in your organization, you need to start here. Don't do any fancy stuff until this is done. You won't get the results from it because you're lacking the trust. That's why it's a pyramid. You don't start at the top. Moving on to that second layer of this pyramid, the author tells us about fear of conflict. You might have trust that everybody has the best intentions, but you're still a little bit too afraid of conflict. So in this case, conflict is actually a really good thing to have when we're talking about ideological conflicts, conflicts of opinion, not conflicts between each other, not I don't like you personally, but more of I think we should go left, not right. This is a healthy conflict, and we need to embrace those ones under an environment where we can trust that everybody wants to do the right thing. Because if we enter ideological conflicts without that trust, we never end. We never get to a productive state. It is a fundamental layer to build for us. And so what that looks like in practice is we enter heated debates about the right thing to do, not heated debates that end up hurting feelings. And something's wrong in the organization if you have a lot of hurt feelings. It means either trust is not there, or maybe somebody's ego is really attached to their opinions. And we see that sometimes with leaders who are moving up the leadership levels and having a hard time switching gears from being a direct contributor. I've even seen CEO levels have trouble with this, where they still have a hand in the team and they really want to influence things, but they want to be the person who came up with the right idea more than they want to be the person whose ideas are right. Meaning, anyone else could have come up with the right idea. It doesn't matter as long as the end state of their ideas is correct. So their thoughts should be influenced well by other people. This is another kind of barrier you can run into. I don't think it's something the author has called out directly in this book, but it is something I found incredibly common in software development organizations, especially as many of us came from being very hands-on, very skilled technical people, moving into leadership positions where we see people approaching our levels of skill but not there yet, or being very skeptical of things you've never seen before. So again, this comes back to having radically deep levels of trust in one another. If you don't have this and you don't have an openness to other ideas, you won't reach a healthy level of conflict. Sometimes in leadership groups, you end up in a situation where you think, well, we can just avoid the conflict forever. But the author in this book tells us this leads to a sort of cultural back pressure through your company, which is all that fear of conflict works its way out in an unhealthy vent to other people through back channels. So it ends up in sort of I can't believe Brian had this terrible idea about using this Postgres database server. We should be using MySQL. It's such a better system. How incompetent. And this kind of weird back talk, right? This is a problem. It needs to be a healthy confrontation in a trustful environment. And if we don't have a conflict, it ends up getting back channeled into this weird stuff. And Unfortunately, not exactly one-to-one, it's more many-to-many. The author gives us a suite of interesting tools that we can use to work through all of those challenges. So one of my absolute favorites is mining for conflict, and I love doing this. And it's just looking for places where there should be a conflict, where people are silently holding on to something that they wish they were debating, or they know they need to debate, but they're not doing it. And this stuff, if you bring it to the surface as a leader, if you encourage it, if you put it on the table, you're mining for conflict. So keep your ears open, sense for things that don't feel right, put it on the table, bring it into the open. Don't let it hide in the shadows, and don't let it brew inside of your top performers that you need to be leading your organization. Another interesting related technique is, sometimes people enter into some sort of conflict, and a little bit through it gets a little emotionally draining, and it's tempting to back out and say, okay, well, I guess we agree to disagree. And, you back away and you just kind of, step down. The author's actually saying a good leader in this moment will actually step in and encourage the team and say, hey, I need us to continue this debate, because ending it here doesn't actually give us a solution that brings us forward. We were so close to a solution, or we are so close to a solution. We need to conclude this. We need to actually get through it, because you both have valid points, but we need to actually get to someplace. Because right now we haven't landed anywhere. And so we have indecision, which means we're not moving anywhere. A good leader will have this sort of conversation with a team, maybe with different words, maybe in a different situation. But the point is, encourage your leaders for having a healthy conflict about the ideas. Don't encourage it if it's getting personal. This is something else to take care of, but do encourage it when they're having a healthy conversation about the ideas. One of the last points to really cement that in there is the leaders themselves should not be shying away from the debate. So if you are the director of a group of managers, or if you are the CEO of a group of executives, and there's a debate and you are shying away from it, you have now set the bar for what is it tolerated. That is now the accepted standard. It's fine if we don't debate in this company. It's fine if we don't have rapid decisions that close. That's what is being broadcast. It all starts there. That is the role modeling behavior that must be influenced. Make sure those debates are not avoided. Make sure they're brought to conclusion. Make sure they are brought up in the first place. This stuff begins and ends with being a strong role model for that behavior. And if it's undermined somewhere, it needs to be corrected. Ideally in private first, right? Have that radical candor conversation in a one-on-one setting to correct that behavior with a leader who's not helping drive a leadership culture in your organization, but it needs to get addressed. Something very useful that the author uses in this book is the Thomas Kilmann conflict model. Now, this is a bit old school, but it's still pretty useful. At least I think it's useful, which is kind of identifying across two axes different types of conflict that we're having and different games we're playing. And why that's useful is because it tells you as a leader how to navigate that situation into the better state. So when you see a debate going on in your company, you need to ask yourself, is that being very cooperative or uncooperative? And is it being assertive or unassertive? Because if you're not cooperating and not assertive, you are avoiding, right? That's not very good. If you're very assertive but not cooperating, you are competing with one another. And competing sounds good, but you're actually competing within your own team, right? This is like players on a soccer team competing with each other for who gets the ball instead of passing the ball to each other. In this case, it's not healthy. You need those people to not compete. And that might be a little bit confusing, because one of the things we like to say is we want a competition of ideas. It's not exactly correct. We want the ideas to be competing, but we don't want our people to be competing. We want our people to stand behind each other and help the ideas combat for the best idea, not the people combat for who came up with the best idea. And of course, if you're not at all assertive, anything goes, but you're very cooperative, you're just accommodating anything, so anything can go through because there's no real bar for the standard, And everything in the middle, that's your wishy-washy, yeah, we win some, we lose some space. That's kind of a lose-lose outcome. And although I would actually argue all of them are long-term lose-lose and feel like on a personal level, somebody won, it's actually a loss for the team overall. The only one that's actually a win for the team is that top right corner where you are cooperative and assertive. And that's a hard skill set. I don't think you're going to learn that overnight if you don't have it in you. You might know how to be assertive. You might know how to be cooperative. You might not know how to do those two things together at the same time. And you might not know how to do those two things together with a different group of people if you were very successful with one group because you have high trust with them, but you don't have that level of trust with another. Remember, build the level of trust before you come to this. So the author really caps off fear of conflict quite well by saying, desire to preserve artificial harmony stifles a productive ideological conflict within the team. So now that we've solved our fear of conflict, we get to move on to the next level of this model, which is a lack of commitment. Now, a lack of commitment is when we can't commit to something, like we kind of don't come to that final agreement point for one of two reasons. One, we want everyone to agree, or two, we want complete certainty in this idea that it's going to be absolutely perfect and we just keep collecting data. I think anyone who's been in a leadership role for at least a year has run into both of these, and they know it's one of the most painful things to do is get everybody in a, yes, we all agree and enthusiastically support the idea state. It's actually not the best thing to go for in a decision-making culture. And then the other one is certainty, where we feel like we need all the information. We need to know not only is there a beach, we need to know the precise number of grains of sand on the beach before we can even go to that beach. It's a little bit like the analysis paralysis problem. So again, our author gives us tools to make this something we can action and fix and get done. The first and easiest, cheapest thing you can do is make sure people feel like they've been listened to. Now, feel like can also be an anti-pattern where you pretend to listen to people. Make sure it's legitimate. Understand what they said. If you had that healthy debate of ideas, they should, as a result, feel like they were listened to. It doesn't mean you have to agree. It just means that they got to be part of that decision-making process and you understood their points and you understand what they see as consequences of not taking their path. It is one of the things that allow you to disagree and commit is, again, coming back to that fundamental pillar of people are doing the right thing. We have trust with each other. We're not always going to agree, but I trust that you're trying to do the right thing. And the complementary part to that is understanding, and you might have to coach your leadership group through this, understanding that a decision is better than no decision at all, especially if that decision is reversible. So Amazon culture would call that, is this a one-way door? And I think that's a really powerful metaphor. Is this a one-way door? When I walk through it, can I walk back and come back into the room, or am I locked out forever? Most decisions you go through are two-way doors. There are very, very few decisions that are hard to unwind. Now, some of them come with different cost profiles. That's part of the debate, but most of them can be undone. And if you're making a lot of decisions frequently, the amount of investment you're making should be proportional to how easy is it to back out of this thing. Because at some point, the questions begin to become a little bit irrelevant with regards to the magnitude of impact that decision is going to make. So if you're on a software team, for instance, some decisions like, should I try to use a new library, could be walked out very easily if it's in a small targeted space. But if it's, should I try a new library that's going to be implemented by 500 developers across the whole thing, you should have a bigger debate for that. But it shouldn't be debated beyond the necessary amount, especially when that debate costs more than the actual work. Or going with that decision would have ended you in a better position, just not the ideal position, which is that last part here, which is we are constantly trying to hedge our bets until we have a perfect understanding of absolutely everything there is to know about this problem. Does it fit this use case? Does it fit this use case and this use case? And we keep building this up. You do need to do that work. However, at some point, we need to think about how do we make good decisions with imperfect information. Now, this, by the way, this is not a license to go and use your gut for everything. This is a question of, can you be skilled enough to understand the decisions that are deferrable down the line? Good architects, good software architects, you will be able to make decisions that are long-term important and defer as many decisions as you can in your software designs all the way down the road. And you can do this with business models, you can do this with product strategies, but there's certain things that are very critical and there's certain things that you don't need perfect information on to get to the end with. And that ends up being a lot of things. Think about this fear of having absolute agreements and a fear of imperfect information. Every time you wanted to, let's say, get lunch with your friends, you would need absolute 100% consensus from every single person on which restaurant you're going to. Generally speaking, that's not how it works. At least not when I've gotten lunch with my colleagues. It's somebody says, oh yeah, today I want sandwich. Who wants to go? Yeah, I'll go with you. I'm fine with that. It's not what is the best lunch today that we can possibly get. And even if not everybody likes the sandwich that day, maybe somebody wanted to get pasta, but even still in that group, they usually come along anyway, right? That's a disagree and commit moment. That's fine. The stakes are pretty low on that. And by the way, you have imperfect information a lot of the times when you're doing that because you don't know what's on the menu. You might not know exactly down to the cent what the price of everything is going to be. You might not know the traffic conditions walking there, but somehow we all manage to go and get a sandwich in the restaurant. And I think that's a very simplified version of this, but that's what commitment looks like to getting lunch when you don't have 100% consensus and you don't have perfect information and you somehow still got to eat a sandwich. So somehow something to this model works. The question is, how do you bring that into your organization where you can make decisions and not hold it up forever? And that brings us on to one of the other tools in this toolkit, which is to set a deadline. And in that lunch setting, it's very informal, right? It's, we gotta go get lunch, everyone. Like, we gotta go now. Otherwise, we're gonna be late. So we have like 5 minutes to figure this out. If we don't decide, I will make the choice. You can do the same thing in your organization. Say, okay, we have to figure out how are we going to invest this 50,000 euro? Are we going to put it into our developer experience team? Are we going to put it to the marketing budget? We need a deadline for when we're going to deploy that capital inside of our organization. When is that going to happen? When will we come to an agreement on the best thing to do? Now, in a decision-making context, if the deadline is reasonable, this artificial deadline can actually counteract the artificial need for getting perfect information or artificially pleasing everyone. It's just an artificial need being overcome by an artificial need. So you're fighting fire with fire, really. Big caveat to that, of course, being, are your deadlines reasonable and proportional enough to make a good enough decision, including the factor of, can I reverse this decision easily enough? You have to take these things into account, but generally, like, don't overdo it. And another powerful way to overcome this is actually make the team develop a contingency plan as part of that decision. So say, here's our decision. If we need to walk back through the door and undo this thing, what does that look like? And usually the act of doing just that is enough to convince the decision makers and the contributors to that decision that they do not need perfect information because the cost to undo it is low enough that it's okay. And if that still doesn't work, you can actually go a little bit further. And this is probably something you'll have to do over an extended time period with your team, but it's actually a very clever idea, and it's called low-risk exposure therapy. So the idea is continuously expose your team all the time to low-risk decisions. Make as many decisions as you can that are low risk. And when they get comfortable with very minor decisions, you can increase that to higher risk and build up their internal tolerance and overcome this behavioral pattern of seeking perfection at all costs. There's this other thing in here which is really, really important on a leadership level to be thinking about, which is unsolved disagreements at the top level of your organization just generates ripples throughout your entire organization. Small, tiny exec level disputes can become interdepartmental clashes. And if you're in a big organization, that could be hundreds of people not working together properly. And so this stuff's really important. The higher you go in that hierarchy, the more disciplined you have to be about driving out fear of conflict and lack of commitment. Because even if you're not public about it, the organization somehow will sense that. Just little things that have a little bit more friction to them throughout the company and ends up escalating and escalating. And so this is really something to keep an eye out for if you want to have healthy decision-making culture throughout your company and the people inside of your company staying aligned. And once again, the author gives us 2 tools to help out with that, which are pretty useful. The first one is called cascading messaging, and the author uses this one quite a lot. And that is at the end of your meeting, at the end of your debate about some topic, when you come to an agreement, when you come to a commitment of some sort, write down not what you agreed to, like do write down what you agreed to, but beyond that, who in your leadership group will be communicating what and to what people. So if you have 5 people in your leadership group, your head of sales is going to tell the sales team what. Your head of technology is going to tell the tech organization what. And make sure that messaging is clear. What this does is it's actually a forcing function and a double check on making sure there's no hidden disagreements. It's actually almost a type of mining for conflicts that were not seen before. And when you do this in practice, you will actually see there's all kinds of things that come up that you didn't know you disagreed about. And it's another opportunity for you to make sure that those minor things that become interorganizational ripples that make whole departments not work together properly, this is one of the things that gets rid of that. Again, I think that's a pretty low cost tool in your kit, right? You can either have 2 departments slow flowing work between each other, not working together, which is very, very wasteful. The amount of money you'll waste in that process is extremely high. Or you can just spend an extra hour making sure that these things don't exist. And another thing in that toolkit is that role modeling behavior. So if you're the leader of your leadership group, you need to be pushing for closure on the decision, not certainty, not consensus. And remember all the tools we have, right? A lot of those decisions can be reversed. We don't always need perfect decisions. We don't need everyone to be happy to get the whole group together to eat lunch at the same restaurant. And that's really what lack of commitment is about. It's a lack of clarity on what we're doing. That's that whole cascading messaging thing. And it's a lack of buy-in where people are bought into the change, but maybe it's not their dream world that they've always wanted. Maybe it's not the best possible future, but it's a better future and we can agree to disagree and we think we can make a good increment on this decision. And if it's not perfect, we know we can roll it back. This is what this is really about. So now that we've actually reached the 3rd level, we can go to the 4th, which is a lack of accountability. I like this one because it makes it very clear that it's actually leaders holding other leaders accountable. Very often when you hear the word accountable, a lot of people think of it as in, can somebody be blamed for a problem? The author frames it in a very productive way, which is leaders are holding one another accountable as a sign of mutual respect. Now, that mindset might not be intuitive at first to many people. The point is, if you're on this team and you want to perform and you trust the people that you're with, those people are there to elevate you to the next level. They're there to say, hey, I noticed this part of your game wasn't the greatest. You got to work on that thing to get better. This is a mutually reinforcing accountability. This is one of the things the author is saying we need. Of course, it's always beneficial to be self-accountable and hold yourself accountable out of respect for yourself and ambition for what you can do. But this is one of the things that make it work in a leadership team is holding one another accountable to those results and understanding that somebody on that team who doesn't come up and tell you, I need you to be an amazing member of this team is almost giving up on you, which is not super respectful. So this is the mindset on there, which is out of respect, they're holding you accountable. Because if they weren't holding you accountable, it's almost an admission they don't think you can do it. And if you're in that situation, they're probably looking for your replacement. And again, there's a whole set of tools to help us create accountability inside of our team, which is, first and foremost, make your goals public. But beyond that, write down the set of behaviors necessary to reach those goals. The idea being that you now have an open contract that everyone understands in your group, between everyone, saying we need to reach that kind of state, which means we all need to behave this way. And that is one of the places where you should be holding accountability and saying, hey, you were lacking, maybe deliver that in a radical candor format, but go and approach the people you needed to work with and say, hey, you were lacking those set of behaviors in that session, which means it's going to be harder for us to reach our goal if that continues. You need to have those conversations. You should also have regular progress reviews. How are we doing together towards our shared goal? This way it doesn't slip out of consciousness, out of sight, out of mind. Now, I know that one's pretty basic, but a lot of people, they don't follow up on their goals regularly. I think it's really important to do that. And I think it's important to do that in public. But something else I really think is important is to shift away from individual goals. And the idea there being we now have a common reason to work together towards something instead of breeding a reason to have interdepartmental conflict. Because if you have 5 heads of 5 different departments all trying to maximize their individual department, you are probably going to have one person in that group win, but the whole team is going to lose for it instead of that whole team being elevated to a better state. So the point is, have a team level objective and hold people to account for that. You know, in team sports, you can still have players that do their individual job really well and enter a Hall of Fame, but the team can lose repeatedly, and you don't want to be the losing team. That's the point here. And again, it comes back to the behavior role modeling from that leader in your group. If they are operating as an accountability vacuum, and in this case, it doesn't mean a vacuum of void, it means a vacuum like the device that collects dust off the ground. If they are collecting all the accountability and not letting anyone have accountability for it, they end up removing the need for anyone to be accountable. It creates a situation where now you have a group of people saying, I don't really need to worry about this because the big leader will take care of it. And now you have a team where the only person who's holding anyone accountable to lead is the big leader themselves. Nobody else is pushing for those results. So it's really important to act as somebody who makes sure you have that self-reinforcing group and not be the leader who takes away the accountability from everyone else, because it's a one-way ticket. It's going to be really hard to reinstall that accountability once you take it away from them. And you'll be overburdened and surrounded by a bunch of underperformance you don't know how to deal with. And this is summarized really well with this statement. The need to avoid interpersonal discomfort prevents team members from holding each other accountable for their behaviors and performance. And now finally, we can move on to the tip of the pyramid. Inattention to results. And it's important that we think about results as more than just financial. Of course, financial results are important in a business, but also think about outcome-based performance as well. You might be optimizing for the wrong things that you can only really see when you're thinking about things greater than the shortest path to make money. You might be sub-optimizing by looking for the shortest path to financial results instead of the best path to optimal financial results. It's especially useful if you're in an organization that's not financially driven, such as a B corporation or a charity. Those are also interesting ways to look at this lens. So now we come to this really thought-provoking point in the whole model, which is, think about, you've built everything so far. You have a team that is super trusting in one another. They're not afraid of conflict. They're not afraid to commit to something. They're holding each other accountable. But yeah, the results, they don't really care. So how is that possible? And there's a few common ways that this is taking place. First of all, you have people who have the role for the wrong reason. They see the role as the signifier as result. You have some people who become comfortable in their seat and they say, I've done it. I've become the senior VP of my department. Now I don't need to really do the work because I am successful by default. I have the title, I am success incarnate. I don't need to push things higher. Things are fine. This is a real thing that exists, and it just doesn't help you with team level results. And so my personal advice there is check the individual motivations of your leadership team one-on-one and figure out what's going on there. And the second one, which has overlap with avoidance of accountability, is of course not having a team level goal. If you have a whole bunch of individuals with their individual departmental goals or even individual personal goals, but nothing to unify them and bring them together, you're not going to be getting the results you want. And this last one is tricky to overcome, but it's also sounds pretty true. And that is no level of any of this stuff can overcome if somebody just is not interested in winning. Now, please be careful not to mischaracterize somebody who's not coming in totally jazzed, excited, screaming and jumping up and down saying, "We're gonna win, guys. This is gonna be so good." Like, don't misinterpret that as we can only hire people who are overly hyper animated and only bringing in people who are jumping up and down, screaming and grinding out 18-hour days because they want to win. That's not the same thing as wanting to win, right? Wanting to win is doing what they can to get the needle moved, moving things that you would have never expected them to move, talking to people, exceeding organizational boundaries, getting the job done with generative characteristics. This is what it's about. It's not, in my opinion, not about pretending you are the TikTok alpha bro rise and grind guy who hashtag hustles 24/7. This is something completely different from wanting to win. That is not what you should be looking for. You should be looking for certain things like, in my opinion, grit. They can stick through the hard situations. They don't give up easily. They keep enduring. They look for solutions. They enlist the help of other people. There's a whole lot of stuff on that. In fact, we can do a whole video on what it looks like when you want to win. But please don't be fooled by a bunch of theatrical gestures that don't have any correlation to actions that help you win. Please don't turn your leadership team into a theater company of actors who are playing the character of somebody who wants to win. You need people who do the things that are hard, not somebody who's running around like they've drunk too much coffee every day, which I'm probably guilty of drinking too much coffee, but that's not the secret sauce behind wanting to win either. And yet again, the author gives us a number of tools that we should implement in our organizations and our leadership teams to make sure that we are aligned to getting results. And the first one sounds very reasonable in hindsight, which is make the results clear and only reward behaviors that lead to results. A lot of the times we end up rewarding best efforts. I've even seen people being rewarded for suspicion that they could produce results before they even tried. You need to reward behaviors that did lead to results. This is the thing that sets the message to your organization saying, yep, that was a set of behaviors that led to results. Let's get more of that. If you end up doing something else, you've signaled to the organization the bar is low. So be careful with it. Make public commitments is another good one to do, right? Commit to something, make it public. It showed up elsewhere in the pyramid, but it also has an impact on this level. Something to be very careful with, but important to do, is to tie compensation, at least partially, to those results. And again, they should be team level results, maybe not organization level results, but definitely not individual level results. It should be the group of people that need to work together to bring the most value should have a shared result. And so one of the things to make sure that's happening is you really feel that in the paycheck. But the author also cautions us that it should not be the only motivator for your team. And make sure that nobody takes home a bonus because they tried hard and didn't get results. And I do think there's a balance to this, right? So to set that boundary, it needs to be fair, it needs to be reasonable, it needs to be something you can accomplish to get those results. Now, if it's unreasonable and out of reach all the time, you can expect your best and brightest people to walk out of your company because they're fed up with having a carrot dangled in front of them. And so there's a really good saying here, which is play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Do not play stupid games with your rewards, but do not give out rewards for effort. Give out rewards for behaviors that led to results in the group's shared objective. This is the thing that cements attention to results in your organization on a leadership team. And if I look at that pyramid and I think, well, what are executives and leaders across all these different companies often complaining about is we don't have results. And well, the first thing I look at is, are your departments actually cooperating, or are they a bunch of silos doing handovers? Are they working towards a shared goal, or are they kind of tossing things over and optimizing for their individual KPIs? And then the second thing I hear the most is, we just need more accountability. Nobody's holding any accountability in this organization. And that's because you don't have a self-enforcing network of accountability. And again, there's a really good set of tools to do that. And we peel that back another layer, and that pairs up almost identical to the third most complaint I hear, which is the team is not committed. They're not committing to an agreement. They're sandbagging, they're delaying decisions, they're not coming up with anything. And then we come down to the last two, which I don't hear the most, but when you have those top three, things aren't working. You take a look around and you see nobody's having healthy conflicts. We are either in that state where we have one aggressive group of people who are barking orders at everyone and everyone's going along with it, or one group of people who are, green lighting everything, rubber stamping everything through the company and nothing's really working, but it's all getting green stamped. And then we go down even one more layer and we discover, well, these people don't trust each other. An absence of trust is not necessarily the same thing as finding people untrustworthy. It could be more neutral than that. Maybe they find certain people untrustworthy in the organization, but you need to go into the positive side further and build the trust. So it's quite interesting that this pyramid is almost top to bottom, some of the most complained about things that I hear about. So I think you can save a lot of money in your organization by implementing the ideas that are laid out here and get better alignment through your organization. And I think the number one takeaway for you from this is, in the author's own words, ironically, teams succeed because they are exceedingly human. By acknowledging the imperfections of their humanity, members of functional teams overcome the natural tendencies that make teamwork so elusive. And the author gives you these 3 sets of things to discuss for each one of those meetings that you should be with your team actively seeking debate on. That is the stuff you need to be talking about generally on average. Now, should you take this list carbon copy? No. Should you throw the whole thing out? Definitely not. Something important to note here is every single one of these ends with a cascading message. And that is to make sure that everybody understands super clearly what's going to be cascaded through the organization. I think it's a really important thing to do. And that's it for 5 dysfunctions of a team. I hope you found this useful. Again, you should get a copy of the book because the behavior modeling in the fable, although it's a fictional story, the first time I read it, I thought it wasn't so interesting, but I read that way before I entered my leadership journey. And then I read it again and again. And every time I reread this thing, I feel like I know those people in different companies. I can find people that I really know who behave those ways. So it's a really good story. And the behaviors the protagonist Catherine's using throughout the book are actually really good ones to emulate, especially when you inevitably fall into those kinds of situations, because this is hard stuff, right? You are seeking out conflict. And if you're not used to that, maybe it's useful to see what it looks like in practice before you go and do it for real with your team. So very useful to read. Super short read, by the way. You can read this whole thing in a half day. Go and get yourself a copy. And I did see that 90% of my viewers aren't subscribed. So if you are watching and you're not subscribed, now's your chance. And that's it for today. So have a great week, everyone, and I'll see you next Monday.